I remember when I was 14 years old, begging my parents to take me into Petland, a popular pet store chain that sold a variety of animals, including dogs, birds, rabbits, guinea pigs, anything a kid could think of. I was drawn in personally by the ability to freely pet the guinea pigs and watch the adorable puppies play with each other in the window. I remember telling and begging my mom that we had to bring a puppy home, but that all came crashing down when she told me the $10,000 price tag. The purchase of puppies from pet stores has led to dogs being factory farmed, where they are subject to unsanitary conditions and negligence, causing health problems which is exploited by the lack of animal welfare regulations. Hey, I'm Leah Scholes, and today on this episode of Into the Past, we will be talking about who is the puppy in the window. Today, in this episode, I'll be sharing what I've discovered in my research that has taken place over the past few weeks about the puppies in this pet trade. This will include going over how the trade has originated and where the puppies are sourced, the conditions they are raised in, and the laws and regulations that are put in place to protect them. Before we get started, I'd like to define a few important terms. Firstly, factory farming. Here I will be referring factory farming as a large industrial livestock farm that rears animals in masses to maximize profits. I will also be using the term puppy mill, which would be a factory farm but specifically for dogs. Firstly, we'll be talking about the origin of these puppies. A lot of factory farms operate in the northern and midwestern United States. Puppy mills became popular in post-World War II, where farmers began to sell dogs to make up for the loss of revenue. Even today, the operators of these puppy mills are people who usually sell livestock such as cows, chickens, and pigs. To back this up, I'd like to point out a clip from a short documentary I watched that analyzed the puppy mill industry. The 2015 film Dog by Dog states most of the puppies that are coming from these large-scale kind of factory operations are being sold in pet stores. So when you go to the pet store and you see a beautiful little puppy who really wants the attention from you, most people have no idea that the mother and father are back somewhere in a factory farm type of setting where it can be horrendous. Grimes, 2015. I think this quote does a good job at highlighting what the average customer experiences when they walk into a pet store. You end up feeling obligated to take these puppies home with you, which is a similar feeling that I felt when I walked through the doors. Seeing all the beautiful puppies trying to run and jump at you, it makes you feel like a savior in a way. Even if you know they came from horrible conditions, you feel like a savior for taking them out of those conditions. But what a lot of people don't know, but for every puppy that you buy, another puppy will replace them. Another article I'd like to quote is The Harm Principle at Play, How the Animal Welfare Act Fails to Protect Animals Adequately from 2015. Many of these farmers turned breeders view their dogs as means of making money. They end up raising genetically and physically deficient animals that are given improper food and living conditions. A lot of these dog breeders only see them as a dollar sign. They often lack care for the dogs and breed them until their body gives out. Breeding these sickly animals can lead to genetic problems that buyers at the pet store are completely unaware of. This will lead me to talk about the horrid conditions that these dogs are often raised in. When it comes to conditions, dogs are often kept in unsanitary places with inadequate access to veterinary care. There have been reports of lame and injured dogs going without care. The next text I'm going to reference is from an investigation on a puppy mill in Missouri that was cited multiple times yet continued operating. Made in the Midwest, Missouri's puppy mill problem and how it should be fixed from 2019 stated that in August of 2016, just a year later, the MDA found several serious animal violations at this breeder's facility, including dogs with fleas, missing fur, and 2 lame dogs. After supposedly 11 straight years of state law violations, there was no evidence that this problematic dog breeder in Curryville ever paid a fine to the MDA. Despite being cited with multiple violations that relate to animal negligence, this breeder's facility was still allowed to operate and they were able to get away without even paying a fine. Dogs are being neglected and forced to go without veterinary care, and officials know but choose not to take action. The smell of what's most likely ammonia is so strong and pungent that you can smell it from outside. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like for the dogs on the inside that are constantly living through it, especially when repeated and continuous exposure to ammonia can cause respiratory infections and irritations. Another subject I want to hit in relation to puppy mills is the regulations in place to protect the puppies themselves. The Animal Welfare Act of 1998 is the main and only federal law that protects animals and regulates breeders. Some states and some cities have enacted their own regulations, but this isn't enough to protect every dog, especially in places like Missouri where farmers are vocally opposed to tighter regulations. One example of local governments enacting animal welfare laws comes from the article A Local Approach to a National Problem, Local Ordinances as a Means of Curbing Puppy Mill Production and Overpopulation. In El Paso, Texas, an ordinance required substantial documentation of puppies sold over $50. This also made so dogs could not be sold for more than $150. I think this is an effective and healthy way to curb the exploitation of puppies, and yet allow people to purchase them without feeling guilty, knowing that there's laws protecting them. It would be nice if this could be enacted all over the states, but the world just doesn't work like that. The next point I like to bring up is the bare minimum that someone must consider when breeding dogs. In the article, Turning Up the Volume on Man's Best Friend, Ethical Issues Associated with Commercial Dog Breeding, it mentions that adequate space for each individual dog is difficult to meet, but other issues like temperature, diet, and exercise vary from breed to breed. Crooney argues that many dog breeders have trouble keeping up with this, even more so when they have various breeds. Every dog has minimum space requirements along with recommended physical and mental stimuli, which varies with each breed even more so. It would be very laborious to keep up with each dog, especially in an environment that focuses on pumping out dogs for profit maximization. Next, I want to talk about my primary sources and how my expectations drastically differed from the reality. Eventually, I started to wonder what my peers' opinions are on puppy mills. Do they commonly support them, or do they even know what they are? I expected the majority of my peers to be ignorant by not knowing what a puppy mill or farm is, and for them to support the farms unwarily. In reality, according to the results of my survey, most people would rather get pets from a humane society and animal shelters than pet stores. I'll also point out two specific people from my interviews. Firstly, Michael Helliger, who was an 18-year-old student at Chattahoochee Tech. One quote that he said that stood out to me was, "If the dog is cheap, then yes," in reference to him purchasing a dog from a puppy mill. He was minimally knowledgeable about his own dog's past, but he doesn't mind getting a dog from a puppy mill if they're under $100. Personally, I wasn't expecting that answer, and I was slightly disappointed. Luckily, my hope was restored when I interviewed the 18-year-old student from Kennesaw, Diego Magana Mata. One memorable quote from him was this: "So, like a dog farm, but instead of keeping dogs until they die, they sell them whenever they can in poor conditions." This was in reference to him understanding what a factory farm is, that specifically a puppy mill. He also wasn't knowledgeable on what puppy mills were, but he seemed genuinely surprised when he found out. He said he would not purchase puppies from pet stores such as Petland, knowing that the puppies came from puppy mills. This made me feel better after my interview with Michael Haliger. I also conducted my own survey and I distributed it through Snapchat stories. I got about 80 responses, and 57 out of the 80 people were either very likely or somewhat likely to purchase their pets from a shelter or humane society rather than a pet store. I definitely wasn't expecting to have an overwhelming response of people who choose to adopt animals from humane societies and pet stores. That really surprised me, but also just because more people adopt from humane societies doesn't mean that they are aware of what occurs in pet stores. Some people choose to adopt from humane societies and shelters just because they want an experienced pet or they want to give someone a second chance at life. The last big subject I'd like to hit on today is just a message to all those people who still believe and still supports pet stores after listening to my podcast. Some may argue that pet stores are a good way for breed preservation. Though I do believe this is somewhat valid, I do not believe we should breed dogs with intentional deformities for the purpose of preservation. I think a good alternative would be expanding the gene pool, per se. In the article Purebred Dogs and Canine Well-Being from 2014, it states, however, deaf dogs do not have an entire unique language or culture of their own, even if they might become better at reading Bogday language as a result of their deafness. Deaf dogs are therefore disabled and worse off than hearing dogs, everything else being equal, although they still may have lives worth living. Intentionally breeding dogs knowing that they will have health problems is morally questionable. They aren't like people who can develop a culture or be unique parts of the community. No, dogs are extremely limited in this aspect and aren't capable of this. Therefore, intentionally breeding disabilities into dogs where they can't join a group specifically is morally wrong. Other people may argue in support of pet stores of knowing the type of dog breed they are buying before purchasing them versus a humane society or a shelter where dogs are more likely to be mixed of breed and have a quote-unquote unpredictable temperament, though this is not true. In the article, Owner Perceived Differences Between Mixed Breed and Purebred Dogs from 2017, it mentions the only major difference between the two groups of mixed breed and purebred dogs was that purebred dogs were less likely to be neutered and acquired by their owner at a younger age than mixed breed dogs. It was noted that dogs acquired at an older age had a lower social stability rating. After the research took this into inclusion, they didn't find any significant difference in the social ability of mixed breed and purebred dogs. Shelters and humane societies where mixed breeds are most common often require dogs to be neutered before they are able to be adopted out. It is not biological, therefore purebred dogs can be subject to the same behaviors if they are neutered as well. It also should be noted that dogs in humane societies are often adopted out at an older age and acquired at an older age when compared to purebred dogs, which are often acquired as puppies and they're younger. Because of this, I think it's fair to say that there is no significant difference in the behavior of purebred and mixed breed dogs. I think this also cancels out the argument that people choose purebred dogs just because they are more well behaved, when that is clearly not true. Overall, the existence of pet stores like Petland have led to more dog negligence. Places like this fuel breeders who blatantly neglect their animals and are allowed to continue through the lacking animal welfare laws. I think this is clear when you look at the origin of these dogs and who was breeding them and why they were breeding them, only to simply make a quick buck. And then you also look at the conditions that these dogs were raised in, horrid places where they were denied access to medical care. And then you have to take a look at laws and regulations that allow these abuses to continue happening to these poor innocent dogs. Even though majority of my responses from my survey suggest that most people support animal shelters and humane societies, that doesn't mean that there are other people out there who are just unaware of what pet stores have been doing, just like I was for many years. Therefore, I do not blame people who support pet stores, especially if they're doing it unwillingly and they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. That's not fair. The last thing I'd like to say, if you would not like to support pet stores like Petland that are fueled by the factory farming of dogs, please consider adopting your next pet from your local humane society or animal shelter. There are plenty of dogs waiting for homes there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Into the Past. Who is the puppy in the window?